Imagine you buy an incredibly expensive front row ticket to the heavyweight boxing championship of the world.
Oh, yeah. The ultimate main event.
Right. You navigate the massive crowds, you get to your seat, you buy your ridiculously overpriced popcorn, the lights go down.
You're completely hyped up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then for 2 hours, you just sit there watching the fighters fill out insurance paperwork and, like, sign liability forms in the locker room.
Just pushing paper.
Yes. No bell rings, no punches are thrown. That agonizing, completely baffling experience was essentially the 2021 Mortal Kombat movie.
It really was. I mean, it was such a bizarre structural choice from the studio, especially because we are living through what you could definitively call the golden age of video game adaptations right now.
Oh, absolutely.
You look at the television and film landscape today, and the expectations have just never been higher. Audiences are no longer satisfied with, just seeing a recognizable costume slapped on an actor.
Right. The standards have completely shifted.
Exactly. They demand that the underlying lore is respected, they expect the tone to be perfectly calibrated, and they really want high-quality, top-tier filmmaking.
Which is exactly why we are jumping into a comprehensive case study of Mortal Kombat 2 for our deep dive today. And just to be clear, we aren't doing a simple thumbs up or thumbs down buyer's guide for you.
Right, this isn't just a review.
No, our mission for this deep dive is to explore how a multi-million-dollar franchise attempts a massive, highly public, creative overhaul. We're going to look at how a studio tries to fix the glaring mistakes of its predecessor.
The course correction.
Exactly. The chaotic tonal clash that results from trying to please absolutely everyone, and what it tells us about the sheer panic of modern franchise course correction.
And that's vital context for you as a listener, because understanding how this specific film attempts to balance desperate fan service, genuinely emotional storytelling, and just blatant corporate backtracking, it offers you a perfect masterclass in how pop culture media operates behind the curtain.
It really exposes the machinery.
It does. It is a very precarious, high-wire act of managing audience expectations.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand the mechanics of what this second movie is attempting, we have to look at the foundational architecture of the story. Specifically, how you fix a premise that was completely missing the first time around.
Yeah, the elephant in the room.
Right. We are talking about the return of the actual tournament.
Which brings us right back to your heavyweight boxing analogy.
Yeah.
Because the core premise of this intellectual property, I mean, the word is literally in the title, is combat. A tournament.
Right, Mortal Kombat.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the mechanics behind the filmmaker's approach to the sequel. Because a traditional Hollywood sequel, right, it simply takes the surviving elements of the first film and escalates them.
Bigger explosions, louder villains, more CGI.
Exactly. But what they executed here is a fundamental creative overhaul. By making the tournament the central axis of the entire plot, the film actively tries to realign itself with the core psychology of its fan base.
They realized the fighters need a reason to actually fight.
Yes. So the setup this time is incredibly straightforward. Earthrealm's champions, led by the Thunder God Lord Raiden, are facing one final, high-stakes martial arts tournament.
The ultimate showdown.
Right. They're going up against Shao Kahn, the monstrous emperor of Outworld, who operates as a literal one-man army. And the stakes are clear. If Earth loses, Shao Kahn gets interdimensional domination.
And that structure is so vital. When you look at the narrative architecture of an action movie, if you don't have an organizing principle like, a tournament bracket, the violence just feels random.
It's just people bumping into each other in hallways and throwing punches for no reason.
Exactly. The tournament structure isn't just a nostalgic nod to a 1990s arcade game. It provides a ticking clock. It gives every single violent encounter a distinct narrative purpose.
It anchors the action.
Right. The studio looked at the fierce backlash from the first film, recognized the structural deficit of having no actual tournament, and just pivoted the entire franchise architecture to fix it. But because Shao Kahn is this absolute juggernaut of a villain, Raiden realizes his surviving roster of fighters from the first movie just isn't going to cut it.
They're outmatched.
Completely. He needs an unpredictable element. He needs fresh blood. And because Earthrealm is so desperate, the writers introduce a brand new champion. And this single-handedly triggers the most drastic tonal shift in the entire film.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
We have to talk about the Deadpoolification of Johnny Cage.
The tonal shift is just undeniable.
Yeah.
So the elder gods, who are basically the hands-off deities pulling the strings of this universe from above, inexplicably identify Johnny Cage as Earth's last remaining hope.
which is wild.
It is. So Raiden is forced to reluctantly recruit him to fight.
I am really hung up on this casting and the execution, though. They bring in Karl Urban to play Cage, who is written as this past his prime 1980s action star.
Right.
Now, physically, they give the diehard fans what they want. His fighting style is a direct homage to Jean-Claude Van Damme, right down to the iconic, split-legged punch to the groin.
Classic Johnny Cage move.
Classic. But his personality has undergone a massive reality-breaking shift. He spends the entire movie aggressively dropping meta humor.
Non-stop.
Yeah, he is constantly riffing on Squid Game, making Harry Potter jokes, dropping quotes from Big Trouble in Little China and The Lord of the Rings.
It completely shatters the fourth wall in a universe that otherwise takes its mythology very seriously.
Right, and here's where it gets really interesting for me. Let me challenge the logistics of this for a second.
Okay, go for it.
Karl Urban is a great dramatic actor, but he is not a trained martial artist.
No, not at all.
So the director is forced to visibly overuse a stunt double during all the intricate fight scenes. If you are shooting a high-octane martial arts movie and you have to constantly hide your actor's face with shaky camera angles and quick cuts just to conceal the stunt double, doesn't that completely defeat the purpose of casting an action star?
It's definitely a valid critique.
Like, does the comedic payoff of having Karl Urban deliver these pop culture zingers actually outweigh the visual distraction during the combat?
Well, that tension right there is the defining struggle of the modern blockbuster. It directly connects to this broader Hollywood trend we could call the Deadpool personality transplant.
Oh, I like that term.
Right. Major studios have realized over the last decade that injecting extreme irreverence and self-aware meta-humor into a grim setting can artificially make a movie feel significantly more entertaining on a moment-to-moment basis.
It's like a shortcut.
Exactly. It masks a thin plot. If the characters don't take the world seriously, the audience doesn't have to either, which completely lowers the barrier to entry. Cage's presence absolutely makes this movie more fun than the strangely self-serious, brooding 2021 prequel.
But it feels like a cheap trick, right? Like you're buying a laugh on credit.
Precisely. Because there is a heavy long-term cost to that strategy. When a screenwriter relies heavily on contemporary pop culture references, they are stamping a very clear expiration date on their own script.
Oh, for sure.
The film actually hits its acceptable limit for these references in the very first act, and then the script just refuses to let up.
It's exhausting.
It is. Think about the mechanics of building tension. When you have a character making Harry Potter and Squid Game jokes while ostensibly fighting for the survival of the human race, it immediately makes the film feel outdated. A joke about a 2021 Netflix show feels incredibly stale a few years later.
Yeah, you watch it 5 years from now and it just feels weird.
Right. The filmmakers are trading timeless, compelling character work for a cheap, immediate jolt of recognition from the audience.
And because Johnny Cage is treating this interdimensional deathmatch like a literal comedy roast, it creates this absolutely jarring tonal whiplash when you look at the rest of the cast.
Oh, massive whiplash.
Because right next to him, the film is actually trying to pull off some incredibly violent, emotionally heavy stakes. How do you reconcile a guy making a Lord of the Rings joke with a woman whose father was brutally murdered in front of her?
You really can't.
You can't. And that brings us to the beating heart of the movie, the character of Kitana.
The dichotomy is severe there. To understand the emotional core they are aiming for, you have to look at the film's prologue. It opens decades before the events of the current timeline, and it is a disarmingly emotional sequence. We see a young Kitana watching helplessly as Shao Kahn slays her father, King Jared.
It's brutal.
It really is. It grounds the fantasy violence in a very real, very visceral sense of childhood trauma and loss.
Then the film cuts to 2 decades later. Adult Kitana, played by Adeline Rudolph, is entirely consumed by this lifelong thirst for vengeance. But here is the twisted part. She has been raised as Shao Kahn's adopted daughter.
Yeah, the ultimate betrayal.
Exactly. She is living in the house of the man who murdered her family. It injects this deeply toxic family dynamic into the narrative. Kitana provides the film with its only real emotional anchor. And Adeline Rudolph is pulling double duty here.
She really is carrying a lot of the weight.
She's balancing intense acrobatic action sequences with a level of palace subterfuge that feels ripped straight out of Game of Thrones.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, if you put yourself in the shoes of the director sitting in the editing bay, you can see the profound mechanical difficulty of managing this tonal whiplash.
It sounds like a nightmare.
Truly. Because on one side of the screen, you have Kitana's deeply human, dramatic stakes. She is actively navigating the deadly, treacherous politics of Outworld while processing severe PTSD.
Right.
On another side of the screen, you have a story about magical ninjas eviscerating each other for the nebulous goal of interdimensional conquest.
Standard Mortal Kombat stuff.
Exactly. And then walking right through the middle of that scene, you have a wisecracking 1980s actor doing stand-up comedy.
Throwing out Harry Potter jokes.
Right. Trying to smoothly stitch together high fantasy palace intrigue, grotesque ultraviolence, and self-aware meta-comedy is a nearly impossible cinematic task.
And unfortunately, the pacing of the action scenes actually exacerbates that whiplash.
How so?
Because, I mean, if you buy a ticket to a Mortal Kombat movie, you are there for the choreography. The undisputed peak of the movie's action is this incredible sequence called the Blue Portal fight.
Oh yeah, the Blue Portal fight is phenomenal.
You have Liu Kang going completely toe-to-toe with a mind-controlled, revenant version of Kung Lao. And Kung Lao is using this teleporting, razor-rimmed hat as a weapon. The spatial awareness, the creativity of the choreography, it is universally recognized as the absolute high watermark of the film.
It is a masterclass in how to shoot supernatural combat.
But the filmmakers make a massive structural error with it. Putting your most visually inventive, choreographically complex fight in the first act of the movie is like blowing the stadium's entire power grid on the opening act's pyrotechnics.
Wow, that is a great way to put it.
Right. By the time the actual headliner takes the stage for the finale, you are forcing them to perform in the dark. The Blue Portal fight happens way too early in the runtime, and because it sets the bar so incredibly high, nothing else in the entire movie manages to top it.
Which completely breaks the film's adrenaline economy.
Adrenaline economy. Explain that.
It's a classic pacing failure in action filmmaking. When you map out the emotional and physical intensity of a script, it is supposed to operate on an incline, cresting in the third act. The climax should logically be the most spectacular thing the audience has seen.
Right, but instead they have to sit through the rest of the movie chasing a high they already experienced an hour ago.
Exactly.
Like, there's a massive, highly anticipated rematch in the Netherrealm, which is basically this universe's hellscape between Scorpion and Baihon, who has been resurrected as the Shadow Ninja Noob Saibot.
That's the fight everyone wants to see.
It is, but even that massive confrontation feels flat simply because the audience's adrenaline peak was already exhausted during the Blue Portal fight. They conditioned the viewer to expect an impossible standard, and when the film's actual climax can't clear that bar, the ending feels strangely anticlimactic, even though the stakes are technically for the fate of the world.
It's just a structural miscalculation.
And speaking of those massive stakes, because Johnny Cage is sucking all the comedic oxygen out of the room, and Kitana's revenge plot requires so much emotional bandwidth, the writers run into a severe real estate problem.
The roster issues.
Exactly. There is simply no room left for the rest of the cast. To compensate for this overstuffed narrative, the film engages in a ruthless game of roster roulette.
The logistics of managing this cast are a nightmare. I mean, the script features over a dozen main characters, all of whom have complex backstories and signature fighting styles.
Yeah.
When you have an ensemble, that large, basic math dictates that you do not have the screen time to give everyone a satisfying character arc.
So the writer, Jeremy Slater, just gets merciless. To trim the fat, he executes these sharp narrative rug pulls, subjecting major fan-favorite characters to wincingly violent, gruesome fatalities on an alarming regular basis.
Just clearing the board.
Nobody is safe. But simultaneously, the roster is constantly churning with new additions. You have dead characters from the first movie being magically brought back. The fast-talking mercenary Kano and the monk Kung Lao are both resurrected because the film introduces a necromancer named Quan Chi.
Right, the classic magic loophole.
Exactly. And on top of that, Outworld is busy recruiting brand new fighters to the screen, like the assassin Jade and a reanimated queen named Sindel. It is a revolving door of magical martial artists entering and exiting the narrative at breakneck speed.
And managing that revolving door requires profound sacrifices to the continuity of the universe.
Exactly. I mean, look at who gets unceremoniously sidelined to make this new formula work. Shang Lin-sung was the overarching big bad of the entire 2021 film. He was the main villain pulling the string.
Yeah, the big boss.
And in this movie, he just gets demoted to middle management in favor of Shao Kahn.
It's wild.
But the most glaring, absolutely shocking example of this roster roulette is what they do to Cole Young. Cole was the literal point of view character for the audience in the first film. He was the protagonist we followed into this universe.
Right.
But he was highly divisive among the fan base because he was a studio invention, not a legacy character from the games. So in this sequel, the filmmakers heavily relegate him to the background. They take the star of their previous movie and just push him off into the margins.
Which is an incredibly rare and telling move from a production standpoint.
Right.
It reveals the exact psychology of the studio executives.
How so?
Usually, in franchise building, you see a massive sunk cost fallacy. A studio will look at their product and say, well, we spent $50 million and a whole movie establishing Cole Young as our franchise protagonist. We have to keep centering him, whether the fans like him or not.
Right, double down on the mistake.
But here, they did the exact opposite.
It's basically an admission of guilt.
Precisely. They recognized that to fix the narrative focus, they had to swallow their pride and listen to the criticism. It is a ruthless but ultimately smart tonal rebalance. By clearing the board of the characters that didn't work and focusing intensely on fan favorites like Cage and Kitana, they are carefully setting up the foundation for the heavily foreshadowed third film.
Makes sense.
And they use the newly freed up screen time to pack the margins of the film with specific Easter eggs, classic arena stages, signature combat moves, recognizable catchphrases. It is an architecture designed explicitly to reward and win back the diehard fans who felt alienated by the bizarre choices of the first movie.
So what does this all mean? If you step back from the teleporting razor hats, the excessive gore, and the constant stream of Squid Game jokes, what is the final verdict on this massive course correction?
That's the million-dollar question.
Ultimately, Mortal Kombat 2 delivers exactly what you expect from a Friday night popcorn movie, bone-breaking choreography, and solid turn-your-brain-off entertainment.
It definitely delivers on that front.
Right. The creative shakeup genuinely elevates newcomers to the cinematic universe, and the Kitana storyline grounds the chaos just enough to keep you invested. But because it is forced to compete in this highly elevated modern golden age of video game adaptations, it doesn't quite take the championship belt. It's a fun time, but it firmly lands as a mid-card fighter rather than an undisputed, genre-defining champion.
It is definitely a massive step in the right direction compared to the 2021 film. But stepping back, it leaves you with a really fascinating philosophical question about how modern Hollywood operates.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If a multi-million-dollar property requires bringing dead characters back to life via necromancy, introducing a dozen new faces, completely changing its entire cinematic tone, and deliberately sidelining its own previous main protagonist just to course-correct its story.
Yeah.
At what point does a sequel stop being a natural continuation of a narrative and start being a highly expensive apology letter for the movie that came before it?
Wow. A highly expensive apology letter written in blood with a lot of wincingly violent fatalities. That is a fantastic thought for you to hold on to the next time you sit in the theater and watch a major franchise pivot that hard. It really makes you reconsider that heavyweight boxing match we talked about at the start. They finally stepped out of the locker room and into the ring, but you really have to wonder if they are fighting the opponent in front of them or if they are just desperately fighting their own past mistakes. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.